VR is for a depressed world, I thought to myself as I tugged and yanked the cord of my Oculus from a forgotten shadow of my closet. I should immediately make clear that I love VR. I see it as an exciting art form with its own set of unique possibilities other art forms cannot offer. Obviously, I don't judge anyone that avidly plays VR. While I bent in my closet and nostalgically looked at the headset, I was only judging my own experience with VR, and I was intrigued by what I realized. My Oculus headset had sat there for several years, untouched, in some box I carried over from when I moved states. Holding it in my hands, I reminisced on the excitement of trying out the experience for the first time and looking to have at it with popular games like Super Hot, Beat Saber, Star Wars, and The Exorcist. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with VR, to the point where it became that anxious obsession children might have when looking forward to leaving school and getting home to some new toy. Except that I wasn't leaving school myself. I was leaving work, a job I hated, and coming home to the bland solitude of my apartment at the time. Perhaps shoving aside the inadequacy of my social life then, and avoiding the dreadful option of going out to the usual bar, I opted to spend my nights in virtual reality during a period of a couple of months. The typical games kept me entertained for a few weeks. I spent hours solving the transporting puzzles of the magical game of Shadow Point and getting a good thrill in The Exorcist while I sipped through a long straw what was due from skipping my time at the bar. With the limited games available then, this was before Meta/Facebook bought the console, I soon exhausted the single-player experiences that interested me, and I landed in the frontierless social game of VR chat. Instantly, I became mesmerized by my experience. Traveling between the user-created worlds, I glided along the metaverse surrounded by its citizens, as though walking through the busy squares of the dreamlike collage of a mysterious city. I realized that the basic graphics did not matter at all in the immersion. Merely passing through the conversations of other fellow humans had me instantly imbued in all the natural behaviors I would acquire in real-world interactions. A natural shyness to speak and greet strangers, followed by the hesitation and then the brave dive into introducing myself. Specifically, I had joined a conversation surrounding countries of origin, about where we were all from, where we informed each other on general questions like languages and food and traditions. When everyone had warmed up, one of the citizens suggested we join a game room. We joined what I remember to be a very clunky world of interactive puzzles that got old very quickly. Some left VR back into their regular worlds, and a few of us stayed a little longer until we ultimately decided to go to another room of a friend's suggestion. We ended in an apartment, suspended in a night sky. Rain fell over our avatars as we passed the time returning to the initial conversation that had gotten us together. I spoke very little. I mainly listened, and at one point I realized how late it was and I left VR to go to sleep, to then go to work in only a few hours. The following morning at work, the VR experiences of the previous night dampened my psyche with the hazy quality dreams can have over us when we remember them. The experience didn't feel real while at the same time feeling so. The very next night I spent it in VR, and the following one as well, submerging me in a sort of trance that at different points in my working days, spells of disconnection from the real world around me would hit me. Eventually, I had to take a break, and when I returned, this strange haziness of the mind was less apparent when I was in the real world. I discovered other games that I could play with my siblings abroad. Namely, Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes and Ping Pong, until life naturally dragged me out of the metaverse and into the real world full time. After a while, I only gave use to the headset as a sort of party gag, to watch real world friends that hadn't experienced VR experience VR. Not long after, I moved states and started a different life when COVID hit. And that brings me to the suspicion that the pandemic played a major role in the metaverse hype, that it distorted, even in Facebook's eyes, its relevance in today's civilization. It brings me scary visions of human adaptability when I look back at even my own belief that the metaverse was just around the corner because of the isolation we underwent in the pandemic. I don't want to dwell on quarantine itself and at how that might have affected us. We can all observe the different and similar ways in which we were affected. In my case, I believe I am fully out of the complexes I formed during isolation. And perhaps along with those complexes, I shared the belief I had in the metaverse being something that was very near in the general human needs and wants road. During COVID, I had become obsessed with VR again, almost doubling down on it. As one of the hobbies one could pick in quarantine, I picked creating VR worlds in Unity and creating 3D avatars. It was fun, and I developed skills that have even helped me in my career to this day. But now that we've fully left the pandemic behind, I haven't felt the same way about VR. My experiences with VR came around two dark moments in my life, when truthfully my surroundings had stopped stimulating me or interesting me and I was forced to look elsewhere. Now, of course, there are a lot of healthy ways in which to engage with VR. I know it even to be used as a tool in treating depression, anxiety, phobias, and PTSD. I am not limiting the technology to being merely a platform for escapism. Certainly, a visit to a virtual museum or an educational VR experience have incredible positives. But I do know that my experiences in VR came at moments when I was not only disconnected with my surroundings, but when I was disconnected with people as well. Of course, during the pandemic, there wasn't that much of an option. But it is interesting to observe how it correlates with my first round with VR in the aspect of isolation. I had good times in VR. I look back at them fondly. I look back at those temporary friendships formed with good humor and almost fascination, at how I connected with strangers beyond what we have seen with social media apps and games. They were experiences in a strange in-between, where on one side you have traditional game chats, video chats, and text chats, and on the other you have reality itself. I don't know where this in-between will settle in the long run, but I do know that its relevance in our lives can certainly be altered by our state of minds. By looking at myself and those around me, and also by looking at Meta and its stocks. An old-fashioned person might look at this video and find it painfully obvious, but I'm still not the type to dismiss the metaverse altogether. I know that what I have experienced in VR is special. I just hope that the awesomeness and growth of the VR space is not out of necessity inversely proportional to the awesomeness of our real world. But that might just have to be the case.